Morning, everyone. This is the um, January 17th, 2024 meeting of the Dunn County Planning Resource and Development Committee. All of the committee members are present, either here or we have a couple online. So we have a quorum. Um, Approval of the minutes from December 20th. Motion?
I can move approval, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I'll give you a second, Diane.
I'm sorry, Tom?
I'll give you the second on that, Gary.
Oh, all right, fine, thank you.
No problem. Let's see. Any questions or corrections? All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, say no. Minutes are approved. Public comments. Do we have anyone here today want to say anything? Yeah, we'll see if we can make it possible to have some comments. Sure. Would you come up to the microphone, so we get you on the tape? All the way standing. Yeah. Sorry. Name and address, Lisa.
There.
Name and address.
Lisa Pellner, E3114 US Highway 12 in Menominee. I'm here for a couple of reasons. One, I'm on the Plan Commission for the town of Menominee, and this talk about the ADUs is pretty intriguing, so I want to see what's coming down the pike. The other reason I'm interested in it is I'm going through the process right now of rezoning part of my property so I can build a place for my mom to be. She is in her late 70s and raising two small children, and I feel the need to have her close to me. So this whole process with that is kind of exciting, and I'm interested to hear what you guys come up with in that, because having that be a possibility before I started this, I wouldn't be doing the survey and the rezone and all of this. I would just be able to build something close to my own home and have her close to me, so, which was the intent. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we do have one other person. A name and address, if you could.
Hello. Thank you. Hello, board. My name is Benjamin Mammon. I live on N3821 Highway 25, Wisconsin. Menominee, Wisconsin, sorry. 54751. And I'm interested also in this. We're, opening up the zoning for people who have extended families they want to have closer, people who just want to, it doesn't even have to be family. If you have friends that they're down on their luck, they spent all their time and resources in big cities, they're broke. They want to be able to live closer off the land, just opening up the possibility for different parcels to be a bit bigger for your friends and family. But thank you for hearing me out and making this an opportunity.
Thanks a lot for coming. Anyone else? And so when we do the discussion later on, we usually, it's not a public hearing, but we'll try and make it a accessible conversation for everybody. With some limitations, of course. So no public hearing today. Staff reports, registered deeds report.
Good morning.
Any comments, Heather, or questions from the committee?
I did want to point out that the 2023 projected revenues, that we were actually able to meet those projected revenues. I know there's been some comments in past meetings that we weren't close, but we actually had a commercial sale that came through So we collected a large transfer fee, $98,000 transfer fee. And of course, the county keeps 20% of that. So that allowed us to reach those budgeted revenues. So I wanted to mention that. And then I also wanted to give an update. I know a couple supervisors have mentioned or have mentioned this legislation. It's regarding the discriminatory restrictions that are in our records. And I actually thought that this was farther along in the process, in the legislative process, but there was just a hearing on this January 9th. So it's still moving through the legislative process, but it wasn't as far along as I thought it was, and we probably should have added it to the legislative agenda. But I think that we won't be able to do that at this point, but I can certainly keep you updated as this moves along. But yeah, I didn't get it added to the legislative agenda, so I didn't know if you had any other questions on that.
Any questions of Heather? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Carlson, I think.
Good morning, everyone. I don't really have anything to add to my report itself, but I will just mention that myself and one of my staff members are going to be attending our annual continuing education training next week in the Dells at the Kalahari. That is Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Allows us to get professional development hours that are required to keep our license current as a land surveyor. So always looking forward to that. There's a lot of good topics and good speakers, so that'll be next week. And I'll entertain any questions if there are any.
Your 16 maps of survey, are those all like over 20 acres then, when you do a map of survey?
Not necessarily. Sometimes somebody, a landowner just needs 140 corner set, or they're having a dispute on one line with the neighbor, so they hire a surveyor to survey just the one property line. They file a map just on that line. So it's not necessarily creation of parcels over 20. Some certainly could be, but it doesn't necessarily mean that those are all new parcels being created that are large.
Question, Tom? Because right now it's kind of a slow time, I would think, for parcels coming in, but with no snow in it, and have you been setting a lot more corner for the county? Because there's a lot of them that aren't really definite location.
Our remonumentation work is what you're referring to. Yes, that doesn't stop.
Okay.
The field work can get challenging in the winter for several reasons. You know, we get deep snow, we can't drive off road. So then we're either snowshoeing back in. I would say some of our best work is in the winter would be off road, because when we get adequate snow cover, there's not a lot of frost, especially in the woods where there's heavy thick mat of leaves, and you dig down and I mean it's just there's no frost whatsoever. But it's hard getting to some of those corners. We end up snowshoeing in a half mile when if we wait till spring, we can drive right to the corner. Likewise, if we work on corners in the road, there's so much frost under the pavement on the shoulder of the road. It's not practical to spend 3 hours with a chisel digging down a foot looking for an iron. So our work is somewhat limited in the winter, but we do have filing work. We have a lot of research. Every corner we go to needs research done. Some of those corners take a half hour to research. Other ones that are very involved could take 3 hours to research a single corner. So we try and, we definitely stay busy in the winter. It's just we shift our focus to other things. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Who's next, Ann?
So I do have my report in the packet here. I guess I really don't have anything to add, unless anybody has any questions on this.
Okay, any questions, Ann?
I don't have any questions on report. The town of Colfax acquired the ferry pit from the county. They've done a lot of work out there in that, and they got a grant from the DNR to put a handicap pier out into that pond there. But we got charged $200 to get that permit. I could see paying for, or getting the written permit, you know, the zoning permit for the shoreland.
Mhm.
But if it's for public use, why would we charge $200?
I guess as far as I know, any shoreline permit requires a fee. I'm not sure if there's something we can do to reimburse based on that, but I guess that'd be a question for Nick, Corporation Counsel.
You let her put it on your next board or next
Sure.
time meeting, like agenda, so at least we can discuss it, because I think it's, if you're gonna open up some property for the total county or wherever, people use it in that,
Mhm.
and when it's handicapped like that, you know, accessible, I think it would, you know, but I can understand where it's necessary to get the shoreland zoning permit just to keep everything that's just been done right, but the service fee is what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, I think definitely, just to add on that too, I have, written a draft fee schedule to change our fees, and that might be something that could be in
Yeah.
that conversation. Maybe we can
Okay.
even add it on the fee schedule.
Sounds good, thank you.
Would that satisfy your? Okay, all right, let's do that then. Any questions, other questions for Ann?
Well, we're gonna discuss on number 7. I'm looking at the agenda. We're on 6D right now, aren't we?
We're in staff reports.
Yeah.
Staff reports,
So-
so not,
Right,
Session.
right. So they'll be doing that after, yeah. So, no.
Mr. Cummings.
Morning, everyone. My report is in the packet, a little bit shorter here towards the end of the year from last year. Also, on the financial side of things, you know, the bulk of our revenues come in typically into the following year, into 2024, based on grants, reimbursement requests. So we're still waiting on a number of funds to come back in to put towards our 23 budget. So that's why there's some differences there. A couple things just to remind you of: the Wisconsin Land and Water Conservation Association conference is coming up in March. There'll be 3 of us in our office attending that, 2 of us presenting at the conference, and then the Red Cedar Watershed Conference as well is coming up. And then one thing that was in your packet last month, and I didn't make the packet this time, but the Red Cedar Conservation Farmer-Led Watershed Group is hosting an event on February 13th at Viking Bowl to talk about their nitrogen optimization pilot program, a statewide grant that they received for this last year and this coming 2024 season. So there should be some good information and conversation there about nitrogen management in our watershed. And then the last thing, those of you that are in attendance at the meeting in person today, we also have our annual conservation poster contest judging that needs to take place. So they're set up over here in the kitchen in the back here. So if you wouldn't mind sticking around afterwards to help finish out judging those posters. We received over 53 posters from students in the county. 2 posters for grades 2 through 6, and then 1 7 to 9 poster. Those are the only ones that were entered in that category, so they'll advance on to the area contest. And then we have 10 posters in the back for you to judge for the grades 10 through 12. And this year's theme was "May the forest be with you always," so keep that in mind. I'll review the rules with you, so we can make sure we get those eligible advanced onto the area contest, and then where they rank or place there, then they'll move on to the state and then potentially national conference or contest. So with that, any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Mr. Chairman,
Questions? Yeah.
sorry to miss the posters, Chase. That's always fun and enlightening. I do have a question on your report. You, without violating anybody's confidentiality, is this the same enforcement situation that you have been dealing with for seemingly ever?
So this is actually a separate case than maybe I've discussed in the past. The one that we've dealt with most of 2023 is in a position where we're kind of waiting for one more thing to take place in this upcoming growing season. And if that is successful, then that case can actually be closed out and we would have
Okay, good.
compliance achieved. The case that I refer to here is one that's been going on since 2017. And we've reached a point where we're
Wow.
involved with Department of Natural Resources and through their stepped enforcement process. And we are in a way along for the ride on that, but also at the same time kind of lockstep with our county's ordinance and implementation. So we're just moving through that process. I think there's some optimistic resolution to the issue. It's just a matter of making sure communication and some action is taken. So otherwise, yeah, this has been one that's going on quite a while, but maybe hasn't risen to this level yet.
Okay, thank you, Chase.
Any other questions for Chase? Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Let's see. Item 6C, the Wildlife Damage Abatement and Claims Program. Alex, here.
Morning, I'm Alex Sandelius with USDA Wildlife Services. I administer the Wildlife Damage Abatement and Claims Program in Dunn County. First item I have for you is just a summary of the 2023 participants in the program. There were 28 participants. Species were all deer and bear, no goose, turkey, or obviously no elk enrollees in Dunn County. Just shows the commodity we were protecting, the abatement prescribed, and the town in which the abatement was implemented. There's only going to be one claim out of all these enrollees. I think that agenda item's a little further down the list here, but I could certainly answer any questions anybody may have.
Any questions? So without objection, then, since we got you up there, would the committee would it be okay with the committee if we moved on to
Sure.
item 9A and B, which deals with approval of the crop prices and the claims? So, you want to?
Sure. You want to scroll up just a hair so maybe everyone can see it. So the one claim was bear damage to an apiary. So that includes, apiary equipment that was damaged, brood, and this individual was producing queens for commercial sale, not honey, so there's no honey on the claim. We asked the Wisconsin Honey Producers Association to just give us a reference list each year for prices, and then I cross-checked that against some of the heavy hitters in the apiary commercial production business, like Man Lake, Dedont, Heritage Honeybee. And then I ran these prices by the producer just to make sure he was comfortable with them, and he was. So these are the prices I came up with. I'm confident in how we vetted those, and the producer is comfortable with them. So my recommendation to the committee would be to approve these prices.
Okay. Any questions from the committee on this? Could I have a motion to approve? Supervisor
I move to
Kinnear
approve.
moves and Supervisor Bjork seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor of approval, say aye.
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 Opposed, say no. Okay.
So the claim itself, this document shows it broken down by line item. The total claim was $2,280. There's a $500 standard deductible for claimants, so that would bring the claim total to $1,780 based on those crop prices or commodity prices we just approved. So what impacts claim eligibility is implementation of abatement. If the producer fails to implement my prescribed abatement, they're ineligible for claim. This enrollee implemented abatement. We caught a bear on the site and then gave him some new electric fence materials to make sure we don't get additional bears in there. All good on my end, so my recommendation to the committee would be to approve this claim.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second? Supervisor Kinnear seconds. Bjork moves. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor of approval of the damage claim, say aye.
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 Opposed, say no. The claim is approved.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming, Alice.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Yep, so no, not, so that's Pittman Robertson money. There is an excess charge on the sale of all hunting licenses in the state and some of the money from the sale of antlerless deer permits. So the program's 100% funded by hunters. And to be eligible for a claim, the trade-off by doing that is the parcels where the enrollee is claim eligible are open to public hunting for the species for which they're enrolled.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Alice.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, Dan.
just as a point of order, I could not hear Supervisor Bjork, so if he would flip on his microphone, that would be very helpful to us.
Thank you.
Eh?
I would just note that Supervisor Bjork asked where the revenue came from to support the programs, and we learned that it comes from fees on the hunting licenses. So it's
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So we're down to 6D, the zoning ordinance, draft standards for accessory units. Wodarchuk, you want to lead us through this?
Sure, I'm just going to share my screen just so we have a little bit of reference and if maybe we want to make some edits. So for those who don't know me, I'm Ann Wodarchuk. I'm a planner and zoning administrator for Dunn County. And just give me one moment here. Just going to make this a little bigger. All right, so included in the packet today, I had a report just kind of summarizing some of the things that were in previous reports that we went through, kind of how we got here, some of the recommendations from the housing work group and the housing study, some regulatory authority. I also listed in here some of the concerns that were brought up in previous meetings. One of those was the compatibility of ADUs in single family residential. So we talked about that. One of the thoughts that we had as staff after that meeting was to make ADUs a special exception use in R1. That way people would have to go through more of a process for approval, additional standards could be added, things like that. Another one was preserving and protecting existing farmland in general agriculture zoning districts. So we had some concerns about the impact on valuable farmland and just, we want to protect farmland in Dunn County. So one of the thoughts we had as staff was to add a standard that ADUs can't be located more than 300 feet from a single family dwelling. I'll kind of touch upon this a little bit later too, but that was just one thought we had. We're also concerned about sanitary systems and groundwater resources. So we wanted to make sure we address that in the standards as well. Another one that was brought up was ownership. We had talked just briefly about whether we should have a standard requiring owner occupancy in at least one of the dwellings on the property or both. So I looked up some information on that. And this was actually an article that I had sent out, I believe, yesterday at the suggestion of Supervisor Kinnear, that included some legal precedent about ADUs that the Utah Supreme Court had set a zoning ordinance standard restricting ADUs to owner-owned residences only. This eventually went to the Utah Supreme Court and was upheld. Also, I researched a little bit more into Wisconsin statutes, and there doesn't seem to be anything conflicting with applying this in a similar form to what Utah did, which was just one of the dwellings would be owner occupied. There would be a requirement there. So we added a standard in our draft here below. I updated the timeline a little bit more. So right now we're kind of aiming for that April 3rd, March area. We're on track so far. And at that, I wanted to note here too, when I sent out this original packet, we had since had some conversations with staff about this 300 linear feet requirement, and we thought maybe this was something we would like to see applied to all zoning districts rather than just GA. Tracy had brought up a really good point that in a lot of areas you might have R1 in an area that has farmland that's definitely being farmed, and they would be able to have their house located in a different area. I could actually let Tracy talk on that a little bit if we wanted, but we can get there later. So that's why we added that in there. Trying to find any other changes we made since the last meeting. We added some different language about the size and scale limits and owner occupancy. I added the special exception standards. You can see those here. So right now we're looking at ADUs as a special exception in R1. So we added some additional standards. So we already have standards that would apply to all ADUs. These would just be additional ones for special exceptions. Keep in mind that the BOA would also be able to add more conditions based on site-specific concerns. So we added parking requirements, an owner occupancy requirement, buffering requirements, and then just a path for a renewal process. So there could be a potential renewal similar to what we do with some of these non-metallic mines. And I guess we'll stop there. Open it to the PRND.
Any questions or comments or considerations? Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd kind of like to focus on the purpose and intent. And I have questions for staff, but I'd like them to hold off so that it doesn't influence the committee members, if that's okay, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
I've asked people without giving them my opinion or anything else about what they thought an ADU was. So the purpose and intent is right there for us again. Thank you. I'm curious, the five of us, what you think an ADU is. What's the purpose of an ADU? What's it going to look like? Tom, when you think of ADU, you're kind of in the middle. I'm in the country. Gary's in the country. Monica and Diane are in the city.
I'm in the village.
Yeah, you're kind of in between. So
yeah.
what's an ADU look like? I'd like to hear that from everybody before we go, because that can focus us down on what we need to look at.
I think to me, the purpose that's outlined there fits my understanding of what it would be.
This is vague. Allow the more efficient use of housing. When you picture it, do you picture a house the size yours is? In addition to that, or?
No.
Okay. So
I mean, we actually have personally have will be considered an attached ADU on our house.
Okay, I should be more specific. Attached, I don't think has been a problem with discussion. Just detached, or Diane, Monica, we're talking about detached. What do you picture it as, so we can, a starting point here, so I know what you're thinking.
I'll go, Mr. Chairman, with your permission.
Sure.
I mean, I think it can look in various ways, but it is a subordinate dwelling to the main dwelling. It can be it can be over the garage, it can be attached to the garage, it can be a separate structure, probably has its own entrance for privacy. Um, but I think we need to expand our definition of ADUs because as one looks at the research around the country, ADUs take very different shapes. Sometimes they are tiny homes. Sometimes they are bigger. I think we have appropriate standards here. I guess I don't know, Mike, what else you want me to address. I mean, it is a subordinate structure that allows an owner to rent space, an owner to house his or her family, to house potentially a caregiver. Um, I guess the uses are defined by the owner. But I think to the extent that it is possible, we should allow as much flexibility as possible to encourage the development of ADUs because the research that I have looked at over all these months that we've been talking about it suggests that it is not a solution to the housing problem, but it is a partial and a good solution to the housing shortage, and particularly for people like me who are getting older and would like to age in place.
Yeah, and I don't want this to come across, Diane, as I'm saying this is bad, I don't want to do it. But unless we have the same picture in mind, I don't see how we can have a discussion as to the standards and so forth. So that helps a little bit. Monica, when you say subordinate, I don't know what that means.
Smaller.
Smaller.
Yeah, I agree with the sort of idea that Diane presented, that I wouldn't want to restrict the use. I think that, sometimes you might want to use it for aging parents. Sometimes older parents might want to build it for their children with disabilities or even without disabilities. I see it as a way for families to stay close. But I also don't want to necessarily restrict it to families, right? That it can be used if somebody wants to use their property, expand it for rental income, right? Perhaps when they retire and they need an additional source of supplemental income, I'm okay with them using it as a rental space. Regarding subordinate, yes, I do envision them as being smaller, right, than the main structure. Certainly, like with respect to height, right? I wouldn't want a single story, and that suddenly, as the main structure, that suddenly has a 2 or 3 story ADU. That doesn't feel right to me. So smaller in terms of square footage, smaller or equal in terms of how many stories it is. That's what I'm thinking about.
Mr. Chairman, may I pop in?
Yeah.
I don't remember when I sent this. And I didn't have time this morning to see if I could find it. The city of Portland, Oregon has been involved in ADUs for a long time, and I'm almost positive that I sent out to the members of the committee a series of drawings, basically house plans, illustrations, and so on that suggest that the picture of an ADU can be quite different. And that there are multiple variations. So it might be difficult to specifically define what an ADU looks like, what people's vision of an ADU is. Anyway, I'll try to find it and resend.
Well, that's helpful. I mean, your comments are very helpful to help me understand anyway. Gary, what do you picture an ADU as when somebody talks to you or you talk to them?
Simply put, I think it's as a duplex. Okay,
now I'm talking about detached only.
Right.
Okay.
That's what I consider that they're trying to have multi-family, no matter what size, even like a 1,500 square foot, that's a nice size house to be there. And I have no problem with the, what I'm concerned is a general ag. Because when we done our rezoning for the town of Colfax, we went over every parcel and put a designation of what we wanted. And I thought GA was not multifamily. So this is going strictly against what our intent was, to keep the rural area rural. And I could see having a special exception for GA, or let the township do the one that wants to rezone it to R2. Because we all say we want to go local, and they're the ones, well, you know, that's a good fit for the ADU in this area, but maybe over here it's not. So either a special exception or let the township like rezone an area.
Okay, I'm curious, those are some solutions, but when you say ADU or someone says to you, I want to build an ADU, what do you picture in your mind? What are you thinking of as far as what it is?
I'm thinking of like a little house, like a smaller, you know, residential. So I don't think of it as the same size as the main house. It's just something smaller, you know, kind of, my grandparents had a place for their mother. It was a house within 200 feet of the main house, you know, but it was, grandpa had a mansion, and the mother had a nice little, you know, 1,000 square foot house right there. So did that help at all, Michael?
Yeah, it does. I just try to get an idea of what people are thinking of when they say this.
Yeah, no, me, I have to follow up if I could.
Yeah,
on Gary.
I'm not in charge.
No, I know you're not. Well, we're all in charge here, but, I mean, this needs to be an open discussion. And I
Yeah.
appreciate your starting it that way, Mike. So Gary, how does that, what you just described as something that, like your family's situation, how does that fit with your idea of what should be in general ag? Would that be multifamily, or would that be?
I know, I'm just speaking of town of Colfax, but we have a 4-acre minimum to build a house on,
Right.
you know, and that. So, I mean, sometimes I get the idea that the general ag is just a catch-all. If nothing else will fit, we'll just throw it in general ag, and that's not what we had, you know, our mind made up on that, or not made up, but, you know, in our mind, we had a general ag with general ag, plus there could be some, like, single family residence on there with a minimum of 4 acres. So it wasn't just all ag, it's also a chance to go to R1, basically.
Mike, you haven't given us your idea yet.
Yeah. The line up there that says, in purpose and intent, offering a means for residents to remain in their homes and neighborhoods and obtain security services and companionship. When I talk with someone, that's what they think of as an ADU. You know, the family's going to be there and so forth. They don't think of the size generally. The other part, to allow more efficient use of existing housing stock and et cetera, that's real broad. That pretty much allows anything is what it says. But the way I look at it is something that fits. There are quite a few, let's see, I don't know if I want to call them restrictions that Ann has written in here. That's guidelines, I'll put it as, that really help. That really help guide that. But I think of something smaller, something that fits in the neighborhood. I don't think of it as a starter home. I'm curious if anybody here thinks, well, an ADU could be a starter home. I don't think of it as that.
Yeah, and it just seemed like when you do a little bit of research on other areas, it quickly, areas where there's a lot of development pressure, it becomes a development, a sort of ancillary type of development almost, rather than the supplemental thing like that the purpose here describes, where people are building it because it allows them to increase the value of their real estate holding.
Diane or Monica, I'm curious, when I mentioned starter home, that's kind of broad too, but do you picture an ADU and a starter home being compatible or whatever?
It could conceivably be. So, I build an ADU for my kids who currently can't afford, um, to buy a home, and they could, um, I don't understand some of the complexities of this, but they could conceivably, leverage that equity for another home. So it could be, it certainly could be.
So you would pay for it as a parent, we're all wonderful parents, you'd pay for it, and then they'd pay you and build up equity, something like
Yeah,
that.
whatever, sure.
Okay. How about you, Monica?
I mean, I guess you're driving at something. What are you driving at? I'm not seeing what
That's a
the
good
concern
question,
is.
Monica.
My drive is to understand what we're all thinking so we can be at the same spot. So we've talked about a little bit, and now a starter home is, that helps define what we're thinking.
I mean, I can see that a parent would do that for their children to start off. So maybe they stay there for 5 years, build equity, move into something bigger. Maybe they do, maybe they don't.
Right. Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
um, relative to Monica's point and Mike's point, Mike, I think somehow it seems to me that you are driving at a kind of single picture of what an accessory dwelling unit looks like, that it is a sort of standard thing. And I don't think it is that. Only to the extent that it is subordinate to a principal structure. It can look like all kinds of things. And it can have all kinds of purposes. And I don't think our focus as a committee is to exclude appearances and uses. I think if the housing study informed us of anything, it is to the role of the committee is to open up opportunities for housing. And I don't think there's any question, and I don't think there can be any question, that ADUs, I mean, more than fulfill part of a need. But they don't all look the same. They don't all have the same purpose. And I don't think it's our job to control that.
Yeah, I'm not a good communicator evidently because I'm not driving at a point right here that they're not good, or they all have to be the same. I haven't made any of those suggestions. I'm trying to get at a point where we know what we're talking about. And I wasn't there. You know, I don't know a lot about this, and I go ask people that do know about this, and so I've asked other people. I'm asking you because I value your opinions. But no, I'm driving at. I want to get your picture of it, and that helped give me a picture of it. When we're, if we're done, I'd kind of like to hear what the staff has to say, especially when people come in and talk to you. What are they asking for? Like the lady that came here and said she'd like to have her son close by. Well, she'd have a place
Sure.
for one person. So you guys chime in now, please.
Well, why don't we
Oh.
see if anybody else on the committee has any follow-up comments they want to make?
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Maybe not exactly what it's supposed to look like, but we're always talking about for the family be close together, but I can almost guarantee you within a certain number of years that family will have separated for whatever reason, either through building or like move on up or whatever. And then I'd like to keep it local because I think like Red Cedar, you can ask Mr. Cook, that they're all R2. And I think one of their town board members actually built another house real close to it, like a ADU, for a brother. Is that right, Bob?
Yes.
You know, and that was what, 300 feet away, or how far away is it?
It's roughly that, yeah.
You know? And that's nice, you know, something
So
like that.
so your point, Garrett, is that you could get, in general ag, you could get the same kind of
Well, they
effect by,
got it's all R2 is
By-
approved, right?
yeah, by zoning R2.
Right. You know, so.
That,
So that's what I'd like to see, is that let the township decide, and then we just put the specifics, like, you know, restrictions, or if it's a special exception, or how far away, or what the size is. That would, I think, be our goal, 'cause I think the townships, being right next to this situation, they would have, like, more knowledge of exactly what's going on than what we do at a county level. Because something happens down by O'Galley, I'd have no idea. I mean, unless I drove down there, which I doubt I'd do, but that would, you know. So, that's just my comment, thank you.
yeah, no. So why don't we ask staff to sort of, you've heard this conversation. Any thoughts or responses?
So I guess we do have kind of some pretty specific definitions here. I know that the purpose and intent is somewhat vague, but I think it's intentionally vague because it's essentially what the intent of adding ADUs into the ordinance would be. We can certainly work on that if we need to. We can look at the definitions more too if there's a specific vision that the PRND has. And then I think Supervisor Kinnear was asking about what are some of the things that were asked for as staff, people calling. So I think early in my staff reports, I did put some examples, but I don't think I've ever actually put any specific examples, mostly because it's difficult to write them without using the actual person's name, especially since we've had a lot of public comment. However, I do have a draft of some hypothetical, you know, if this happened, or real world situations that I left intentionally vague. And I do have that if that's something the committee would want to see. I just kind of chose not to put it in here just to keep things simple, but I do have something like that if that's something you'd like to see.
Well, could you give us an idea of it with, I mean, you have a really,
Yeah,
I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot either, but
it's okay.
just be nice to see when people call you, the kinds of things that they're asking about.
Yeah, just and I can let Tracy speak too, but just off the top of my head, I think a lot of them are, you know, one of the calls I've gotten was someone who, her parents are elderly, they have a large property. I think it was, I don't remember how large it was, but essentially she wanted to live on the property as well, and she was envisioning like a tiny home on the property, you know, in the backyard of her parents' home, where she could live, where she could still let them be independent. She could still be independent because at 50 she really didn't feel like moving back in with her parents. So she wanted to know if she could build a tiny home, and of course with the rules that we have in place now, we could not. But, you know, she kind of just envisioned that as she can move back, she can help them out, really small scale. We have heard some public comments, so I don't feel like I really want to cover their specific situations. Tracy, can you think of anything offhand?
They're all the requests we have received have been family member, whether it's the elder asking for their child to stay, or the child wondering if the elder parent could stay.
I will say it has been all families that have asked us about this, and I realize, I think someone had a point too, that, you know, things will change in the future, families change, people move on, things like that, but right now, that's the need that we're hearing.
Thank you very much.
Why don't we,
Mr. Chairman, I have some
Yeah.
questions. I have a question that relates to a concern that I still have, although I know I'm in the minority on that. And on page 8, under renewal, explain to me why you think the BOA should have, first of all, why renewal would be necessary, part one, and part two, why the BOA would be given that, additional authority.
So I want to preface this with a lot of these things are meant to be conversation starters. I am not dead set on anything.
Okay.
And this is also not personal opinion. But I will say that one of the reasons I wanted to have it here was that ADUs are new for Dunn County. We are going to find things that we didn't include in here, that standards that we might have missed, issues will come up in the future that we didn't think about. Allowing a renewal process would allow the BOA to look at it and say, hey, you know, we've had some complaints about this property. We're finding that the neighbors feel there's lack of privacy, or there's a situation with the parking or something like that. This would allow the BOA to review that periodically, say every couple of years, maybe every 5 years, however they decided. But just to say, hey, we need to add a new standard here. We need them to build a fence. We need to add more parking, things like that. That's kind of what I'm envisioning here for renewal.
Okay, I have some personal questions about giving that kind of additional authority to the BOA. And I mean, I think this relates to and I suspect it is a singular concern, that I do think that we should be doing what we can to encourage the development of ADUs and not excluding ADUs, which I think conditional use actually does. And I think there's some evidence in the research that suggests that. I, for example, am pretty sold on the idea of permitting ADUs in R1. As opposed to making it a conditional use governed by the BOA. I have a hard time understanding why an ADU requires a separate process in R1, and why it can't just be a by right use. And I mean, we've had this conversation before, and I think I might be the lone voice advocating for R1, but I'll just pipe up one more time. I think that they should be permitted in R1.
May I?
Yeah,
I
please,
just
go
comment
ahead.
about
You respond to
conditional
that, yeah.
use, please, thank you. So just to add to your point, so conditional uses and special exceptions, same thing, as you know, but just so everyone understands. Specifically conditional use and special exceptions, it's defined as something that's normally not permitted in a zoning district. So a lot of times it'll just be something that's, it's not in that permitted use because that doesn't fit quite the purpose and intent of that zoning district. However, it's close. So that's why some of these things get put as conditional use rather than a permitted use. I think my reasoning for adding special exception for R1 was based on conversations of PRD. Of course, it's still up to PRD whether it's a conditional use or not, but I just wanted to have that here so that, you know, it would add to that discussion and maybe make it a little more clear, like what would that look like if we did have special exceptions or if we had specific standards. And that's all I had to say for that.
May I?
Yes, Monica, please.
Let's see here. So a few things on this. I actually have the same view as Diane about allowing ADUs by right in R1. I mean, there's a few different ways we could do that. Like last time we talked about having a junior accessory dwelling unit of 500 feet or fewer. Perhaps we could consider allowing that by right and doing something larger by special exception. Something like that might be a decent compromise. But what I wanted to ask Anne is, can you kind of walk me through, like, let's say I had a R1 property in town of Menominee and I was considering building an ADU, like what would that process look like for me to get that approval?
Are you asking is a special exception or permitted by right?
I suppose a special exception. is what I'm wondering about.
Sure. So all structures would require a general zoning permit, so they would need that at least. However, if we're going to have a special exception version, they would have to go through that process first. So what that would look like is they would fill out a special exception permit through our office. We would meet with them and discuss that, make sure that it meets, you know, their plan meets the original standards that are already in the ordinance. Then they would be required to have a hearing with the Board of Adjustment. And then at some point we would ask the town for their opinion. Usually right after we get the application, I send out a request to the town to get their opinion on the permit. So the towns can discuss that at a public meeting as well. They might have suggestions for the area that are site specific. They might approve or disapprove. So then that information would go to the Board of Adjustment. Staff would take photos of the site, review the site, and then present that to the Board of Adjustment, and the Board of Adjustment would make that decision. And depending on what that decision is, it would be approved or not approved. And that's it. There's an appeal process for Board of Adjustment, but they're a one-stop shop.
So as a homeowner, like how developed do my plans need to be? Can I just sort of say, I'm thinking of doing a cottage, 750 square feet, 1 story, or would I have to come like with blueprints in hand? You know what I'm saying?
I mean, we would prefer some pretty good site plans. We would want to know a location specifically. We would want to know square footage. I think we can understand that maybe internal things might change as houses are constructed, but the more details, the better. However, I mean, we need to know that it meets the standards, and those are the things that we'll be looking for. And I'm kind of just scrolling down to where those are. So we would be asking them things like, what is the square footage? Where are you placing it? How is wastewater being treated? Things like that.
And are those things, those standards can be included in the regular ordinance also, and not be subject to review by the, I mean, some of those standards are in the ordinance and not reviewed by the, where's the distinction between what you can approve and what the Board of Adjustment can approve?
Yeah, so if you are able to see your packet, it would be, right now it's the 13.3.17.0, and I think I had 6 in the original packet, but it should be 5. It just says standards. The following standards must be met in order to establish an accessory dwelling unit. So these standards apply to all accessory dwelling units, whether they're by right or by special exception. Right. So I have these standards here. If you scroll down, you'll see additional standards for special exceptions. So these are required in addition to the other standards. I will just say that a lot of our special exception uses do not have additional standards written in the zoning ordinance right now. And it's essentially left up to the Board of Adjustment to add conditions to the permit based on the site. So this is also something we could keep in mind. I also wanted to just add for this renewal thing, we did talk about that. The Board of Adjustment already has a right to put this in. They are allowed to have a review process and a renewal process for special exception permits already. This is addressed in another section of the zoning ordinance. We could certainly take this out, but it is already there. I think I just kind of added it in there just so we could have it clear. But they are able to do that with any special exception permit at the moment.
I have a question.
Yeah, Mike.
And with the Board of Adjustment, we all know here that the town can make recommendations, but unlike a rezone, they can't veto it, correct? The town
Correct.
can.
Yep.
Okay. With the BOA, you've been going to a lot of those meetings. How often do they turn down a special exception?
Very rarely, I would say.
Question for Ann. So how hard would it be for a ADU to be like legally separated and then sold outright by itself? I know there would have to be a, like a survey of it done there and that, so it wouldn't be a cheap process either to get it out.
Right, so to legally separate it, they would have to do a land division, so a subdivision. That would go through the regular CSM process. I guess that would be most of it. I mean, there is a, I do at the moment in this draft have standards for sale or transfer and deed restrictions to be applied.
Could you go through that?
Yeah, sure. So if you're looking at the standards, the following standards, this applies to all accessory dwelling units. Letter F is sale or transfer. The separate sale of an ADU will not occur unless the portion of that subject property is legally subdivided in accordance with Dunn County's Chapter 16. So essentially, to sell it, you would have to go through the CSM process and legally subdivide that property. You can sell the house separate from the property. And then we're also asking that a deed restriction prior to issuing the permit must be recorded with the Register of Deeds. So that would prohibit the sale of the ADU unless it's legally subdivided, and then it would also prohibit the conversion of the property to a condominium.
So, would we have to change our land division ordinance to accommodate that sometime? Because of the size or whatever that it results in?
I don't believe so, but I think Tom could answer that.
So we don't regulate land use or the size of buildings on a proposed new lot, but I guess the one thing I'm concerned about is, or that came to my mind actually, is if the ADU itself, the physical structure, is close to the main residence, that setbacks can't be met. That's my biggest concern. Some of these ADUs might be 200 feet from the main residence, but some of them could be 20 feet connected with a breezeway or something. And now, how do you divide that smaller structure off and still comply with the zoning setbacks? I think that could be an issue. It could crop up. Mm-hmm.
So in order to be, I'm glad you asked about that. Thank you. This is a good thing to have in here. So if it was separated legally, it would still have to meet the zoning requirements, lot size and so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the prohibition of conversion to condominium. A condominium conversion could technically avoid some of the land division problems. So that's a way to assure that those issues are still in place.
And just one more comment, Mr. Chairman. When I think of a R1, I'm thinking of like a highly density, like in the city of Menominee, but there could be one out in the country a little bit, suburbs, that'd be a couple acres. You know, I wouldn't see a problem here then,
No.
because they'd have enough land to do it, but, you know, when I think of R1, I'm thinking boom, 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 house right down there. Like you said, they don't even have to buy a lawnmower, because they don't have that much room. You know, so sometimes you have to get it straight in your mind what a R1 is.
And I'm glad you brought that up too. You think the town of Menominee, part of the town of Menominee people think is actually part of the city. River Heights Road, Birch Creek, down there around the Pinewood Golf Course, especially River Heights Road, that's R1. And picture, those are all nice houses. If it was permitted to have an ADU, you could take a trailer and put it on every single one of those lots with this ordinance. Is that correct? It's, as long as it met the 1,500 square feet.
Right, so if you just take it as you said, correct, yes. However, I will say that there are other limitations already in the zoning ordinance that need to meet setbacks. They would need to be able to have a septic system that serves that property. There's a lot of things that make that difficult already. It wouldn't be as simple as just opening the floodgates for it. All regular zoning would still apply. So if it's a pretty small lot, if it's already 1 acre or acre and a half or under, it might be really difficult to do that, but yes. Another thing that I just thought of as you mentioned that is that a lot of these subdivisions have covenants that exist already that would either some of them specify whether you can have a second dwelling or
Sure.
not, or they specify the number of outbuildings or things like that. So there is another avenue for restriction there as well.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
So what would happen if they put a tiny house in or whatever, on a R1, and yet the neighbors think that it's affecting their value of their property? So how do you take that into consideration,
We don't.
hypothetically?
It's a really good question. I don't know if I could answer it just right off the top of my head. I know that in special exceptions, we do have existing provisions that the board would have to review things like that, like how it would affect the neighborhood and make sure that it's not diminishing property values. They wouldn't be able to approve it essentially if the neighbor could prove that it was affecting their property value.
In a way, that's an argument for the BOA involvement if you have the right standards. I mean, I hadn't thought about the areas you're talking about, Mike, that's where those kind of areas could result in some conflicts if we're not careful. Yeah.
Just continuing, I know Michelle Hurdlicka was here and she expressed concerns, just like you did. There's going to be other kinds of restrictions. Around the lake, town of Tanner, I think they're in the same situation, probably. There are, I would guess, hundreds of lots that are less than an acre that have been built on. And, an acre is quite a bit. There's a lot of space. So, on 1 acre, you can put a large house, tennis court, swimming pool, and all kinds of other stuff. But there are other situations. So, to talk to Diane's point of opening up R1, that's really my only concern is the R1. After listening to this, and R1 has so many lots that you could put something on, but it wouldn't be good to do it if it was strictly a permitted use. I'm thinking of all the things we learned in the CAFO study and in the water study, that out in the country, a septic system on an acre is not a problem. Around a lake, in a concentrated area where you got 1 acre, 1.5 acres, and so forth, then you have a problem with groundwater contamination. And we don't need to add that problem. That was one of the concerns. What's the one on the east side in Red Cedar that we approved a few years ago? Development. Timber Valley, was that it? And I know some people voted against it because of that concern. So, yeah, R1 is really the only problem. I mentioned before that, I don't know that much about this, so I talked to a whole variety of people and I asked them things, and I did it without giving my opinion first. I simply said, we're talking about this. I talked with someone on the Plan Commission at the town of Tanner. I talked with Bob Cook here. I talked with Kent Jackson from the town of Menominee. I talked with Bob Rosendahl because he's a developer, and we had talked about sizes and so forth. I talked with Lisa because she's going through the process. And in each case, I asked them questions. I asked them for what is it that you see as an ADU. And it's quite a variety of things, Diane. So I can understand that we really shouldn't be limiting it too much. But I also think that we need to protect our groundwater. We need to protect the people that chose R1. simply because it is R1. Think of yourself if a neighbor came in and did something that really made it, well, not very nice to live next to, or really changed it. So, I have some suggestions. I'm not just sitting here complaining, but I have some suggestions to make that would, I think, fit the bill. It would allow this to go forward, and we could probably all agree on it. But a couple of things that people said right off the bat with the 1,500 square feet, Bob Rosendahl said, that's a house. His development, the size he's building are 14 to 1,600 square feet, most of them. Those are nice houses. So that's a concern of mine. In talking with people and looking at and listening to what Michelle said, I think we could do something with minimum lot size. If you got a half acre and you can fit something on it, that doesn't mean you should do it. So some of those kinds of things that I have suggestions for. And I don't know when we do that or what you want to do with it, Tom. But I'm all for going forward with this with some modifications that can make it more environmentally friendly and person friendly.
I know that you have up on the screen. Was going to ask a question about the choice of 1,500 square feet also. It does seem like a lot larger than any other ordinance that I had looked at in just researching it. And I'm wondering why you picked that. And is that a little bit, as Mike said, that is a small house, really. Yeah.
I believe in staff discussions, we calculated the size of, I think, Tracy, fill in what's the word I'm looking for here? Was it like a small
Apartment?
It was a home. It's a home. It's a standard home that you can build. That's pre-built. It's a pre-built home that you can build on
Manufactured home.
top. Manufactured. Yeah, the Wausau homes. That's a typical size of those. I think that's where that number came from. And then the 750, we had previously had 500, but we thought that 750 was a little more reasonable compared to 500, so that was why that was changed. Again, just to put it out there, like staff is just trying to respond to what PR&D is having. So if you feel there's another square footage that would be more reasonable, we can certainly change that.
Mr.
May I?
Chairman? Oh, go ahead, Monica, please.
Oh, I was going to ask, so Mike, you suggested that you had some ideas for additional standards that you would advocate for that you thought everybody could agree with. I'd be interested in hearing more about what you're thinking.
Diane, first though, you had something to say?
Well, it is a general point that the more conditions we attach to ADUs, the less likely it is that they will be built to accommodate our housing shortage. I mean, and I think the evidence in the research that I've been looking at would suggest that that's the case. Most of the researchers argue for fewer rather than more restrictions. So that's just my general point, not necessarily to comment on your specific suggestions.
Monica, you were gonna.
Oh, I just wanted to ask Mike to talk about the additional standards that he was thinking about.
Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, I wouldn't call them additional, it changed. 1,500 square feet in talking with Bob Rosendahl, a developer, he said, that's a house. He said 500 to 600 square feet. I'm looking at, here's a 3-bedroom house, 2-bathroom house, 1,150. Here's a 1-bedroom, 700. Here's another 1-bedroom, 1-bath, 700. And you could have anything, you can have a 2-bedroom that's 750. So I'm suggesting we take the 1,500 and make it more realistic and make it 750. So that's the first one. which is larger than Mr. Rosendahl suggested, but I think more in line with a two-bedroom, one-bath house with a kitchen and maybe even a dining room.
I'd be interested in knowing whether there are other, what the experience of other ADU ordinances is with regard to that square footage. I agree with Mike that that strikes me just anecdotally as larger than what is typically used. I don't know whether it's 750 or 1,000, but 1,500 seems like it might be a bit of a stretch.
So, Mike, would that, changing it to 750, would that take care of your concerns about R1, or would you still have the concerns about R1?
I would still have the concerns about R1, but we're getting there.
I wanted to say regarding, like you brought up a certain road, was it River Heights Road maybe, that is nice. I'm not familiar with the road, but I kind of have a picture in mind of what it looks like, a nice kind of suburban, upper middle class, something like that is what I'm seeing. And the worry is, what if everybody puts a trailer home on it or whatever? I mean, technically, legally, I suppose that would be possible, but we have to remember that the owners are still living there. They're invested in the community. They want to keep it nice. They want to keep their resale value up, and they want to have good relationships with their neighbors. So maybe legally that's a concern, but practically I don't see that kind of thing happening. People want to take care of their properties.
Well, there are a lot of assumptions there. First off, people die and move on, and people buy it, and not everybody is concerned with their neighbors. There are problems all through, but yeah, I can see some of that. And it's not going to happen to everybody does it, but it only takes one or two to cause problems, and why have it?
Why have it? I mean, we're 3,000 units short in the next couple of years. That's why we're trying to fix a huge problem. I mean, that's my
And
take.
This is one tool.
Right?
You go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
This is one tool, and I want it to occur. We should, but it's not end all be all, and you have to balance what people have planned when they build. You have to balance the environment. And I think your heart's, you're in Diane, the heart's in the right spot. You want to have a place for everybody to live, but you got to have a place for them to live in 20 years so their water's not polluted too. So it's
Mr. Chairman,
compromise.
may I respond to that point?
Sure.
I mean, I think there are adequate standards in what Ann is proposing here. I mean, we're not advocating the building, and you certainly know that I would not, of environmentally insensitive wastewater polluting structures. I mean, there are standards to govern that. So I mean, why that's not sufficient? I don't have the page in front of me. 8C, domestic wastewater disposal must comply with sewage system requirements unless exempted by the state, blah, blah, blah. The zoning administrator may require the applicant to demonstrate the adequacy of the system for the proposed structure and anticipated number of bedrooms. I mean, how is that not sufficient?
Well, you learned when you're on the committee, the CAFO study, and we learned on the water study that 1 acre is sufficient out in the country. You could probably put a half acre with a septic out in the country, but when you concentrate it, remember we learned it doesn't work. It pollutes the water. And that's what we're talking about here with R1. I'm only concerned with R1. R2, R3, they're multifamily anyway. And like in town of Red Cedar, I think Mr. Cook said, fine. Kind of bring it on. They're, ADUs are fine, but there's got to be a balance, Diane, and you and I are seeing a different balance is all. So I'm just proposing,
Completely.
this is one of the things I'm proposing to look at and, bring it back and look at other, but there are a few other things that I think we've missed. As you think about this, this is what Bob Rosendahl said. He said, you're allowing 2 units on 1 acre, basically. So he says, well, why don't you just make it a half-acre minimum now? The other thing he said was, it's a good way for somebody to get around the 1 acre minimum again. So it's like Joe Biden said to the president at the time when he was vice president, this is a big deal. He had a different word in between there. This is a big deal here that we're doing if we're allowing 2 houses on 1 acre. If we're allowing 2 septics or a septic big enough for 2 houses on 1 acre. And we need to look at it and look at it carefully and go forward with it. But, we're just differing, not on going forward, we're differing on how we can compromise and get it done.
We certainly are differing on adding additional difficulty and additional exclusions, which makes it harder to move forward. So I'm wondering about whether you think it really makes sense to move forward. You keep adding conditions, additional steps. I don't know. I'm kind of nonplussed by that. I mean, if everything says it's a good idea, and our housing study, which I think should be building on and from, says you need this. I mean, why do we make it more and more and more and more difficult?
I haven't added any conditions. I've changed conditions from the draft.
Say that again, Mike, you what?
I haven't added any conditions. The condition was originally
No.
1,500 square feet, and I just suggest changing it.
Yeah.
The draft was for discussion. And I think land use drives this more than, at least as much as housing.
I think the other side of what you're saying, Diane, is that one of the things that could puts real limits on the expansion of this is if it happens, if there are problems, if there are bad developments, and people can see that, well, that didn't work, that doesn't work. So we want it to enough regulation that we can have confidence that as we go forward, the result is going to be something that people are going to see as positive, and it's not going to raise problems. And in a way, to me, it gets back to what the purpose is. And I think I don't think the primary purpose is to necessarily to solve the housing crisis, but rather to address primarily to address a particular need within the housing crisis, which is this need for people to be able to accommodate family situations and friend situations and things like that. But and secondarily, then to also expand the housing stock. I'm not so sure that I think that it is a solution to the housing crisis. It seems like in most cases where this has been implemented, it hasn't been, from what I researched anyway. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but that's been my research.
I think in the evidence suggests that in densely populated urban areas, ADUs are a solution to the housing situation. But I agree with you. This is only a partial solution that's designed to meet the needs of families. So I'll be quiet now. Aren't you
I was
glad?
wondering, Tom, if I could just run through a couple of things.
Sure.
And then we can decide you guys can decide what to come back with. But there was something in here that kind of caught my attention just above the definition of living area. detached ADU. That's the one where it says 1,500 square feet. Okay, I already brought that up, but it says of living area. And then living area down below is defining the interior habitable area, not including garages. So you could have, in this case, a 1,500 square foot living area and a 1,000 square foot garage. It doesn't limit that at all. So that'd be one heck of a footprint. So something should be done in here, no matter what the square footage turns out to be, because people will try to get around things. And somehow the word footprint should be in there, or just something to take care of that idea. Like I have a small two-car garage, is about 650 square feet. And you could easily make a 1,000 square foot garage in addition to whatever we put there. So that's something that I hope Ann can look at. In regards to lot size, if you're going to have two houses, we should have 2 acres, is what it amounts to me. It's like the town of Tanner. Single family is 1 acre, 2 family or duplex is 2 acres, a threeplex is 3 acres, and it goes right on up the line. So those are the square footage. This is, I think, just a little wording thing that could be a problem. And the acreage to adjust the groundwater, especially in these areas like in the town of Menominee where it's a city and around the lakes. So those are 3 things that, Diana, we're just got a different point of view. I want to go forward with this, but these things would help protect it. And the only additional thing that I've asked for here that wasn't in here was minimum lot size.
Could you talk a little bit about that, Mike?
Michelle Herdlicka addressed it a little bit on lake properties, and they also exist especially in Cedar Falls, where there are lots less than an acre that duplexes are being built on now because they were grandfathered. Well, there's nothing we can do about that, and you probably shouldn't have duplexes in a concentrated area on a half acre or 3/4 of an acre. But going forward, why would we want to continue to allow duplexes on 3/4 of an acre or half an acre, especially in around the lake or in like Cedar Falls or areas like that? So I'm looking at groundwater again and concentrated areas of population. And like I've said 2 or 3 times already now, we learned, what the deal is with septics and contamination. So that's why if you got 2 families, 2 acres. There might be some way to say, oh dear, we're only going to do a 600 square foot thing and it's only going to be 1 bedroom. So maybe you don't need 2 acres. I don't know, but just in general, 2 full houses would be 2 acres. Does that explain it all, my thinking? Or no?
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with it, but yeah.
I don't.
Gary.
So we're talking about like your lot sizes. If, all the, 22 townships or 16, 17 are zoned, how many of those zoned townships have a minimum lot size for a single-family house? I think there's quite a few of them. So we're talking about lot size, but that might go against what we're trying to, like you to put 2 things on there. and I know I might get in trouble for saying this, but that wouldn't be the first time, but it seems like there's some people want to have like less standards. But yet when we had the CAFO study, I thought the state standards were very strict, and yet we want to put more restrictions on what is already the state standards. I mean, there's got to be a little bit compromise here. You can't, well, that's my pet subject, so we're gonna, you make that really easy, and the other ones I don't like, so we're gonna do as much as we can to not let that happen. And, you know, you gotta be compromise, I'm saying. Am I in the doghouse now?
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Tom, I was wondering, so you said to Mike that you disagree about having a minimum lot size. Can you say more about that? Why you disagree with that?
I disagree. So I'm uncertain as
Mm.
to that, and I have to talk to Mike more about what his concerns are.
Okay.
Because it seems to me like in a way we are trying to increase density. Um, so uh, yeah, so I'm uncertain about it. I think there are areas where that would be. I mean, I appreciate the concern about groundwater, especially in areas around the lake where there's increased high density already and real concerns already. Um, so it's a bit of a puzzle to me. That's mostly what I'm thinking.
That makes sense. And I mean, I share the same concern about protecting groundwater resources. I don't have the technical understanding to have a informed opinion about this, but I do think it is important.
To me, some of this gets to the question that we started off with, which was why are we suggesting that there be a role for a BOA to play? And it does that is one way to add regulation, no doubt, but in a way that provides for an opportunity for compromise, because the BOA has the ability to address specific situations. Now, one of the weaknesses of the BOA is it's not an elected body. It's just kind of an appointed body.
Right.
And it doesn't have ordinance authority or anything like that we do. So it raises some real concerns there, I think, or not concerns, but questions about process
Right.
and fairness and that sort of thing. I get the sense that we all want to move forward. Yes. I'm not sure what the next step should be. I mean, you guys have staff have any suggestions as to what you think based on this you would like to do?
I mean, I think what I would typically do is just based on the conversation today, I'd try to go in and address some of the concerns, maybe add some alternatives that the PRND could choose from as far as addressing those concerns. You know, that I could do something like that. Again, it would involve this coming back to the PRND as a discussion item at another meeting.
Yeah.
You know, I can certainly do that. I have a lot of things running through my head as far as like, you know, could we propose specific standards just for R1 rather
Right.
than having it as a special exception?
Right.
Things like that. I mean, that was originally what we proposed for GA, was that GA would have a standard reducing the like distance between those two structures. You know, that's something that could be done, so that way, you know, they could still be permitted by right, but they would maybe have a little bit more specific standards that address R1 so that it can kind of keep it compatible in R1 specifically. I think the concerns with like density, at least I'm hearing with R2 and R3 aren't as big of a concern, mostly because you can already build duplexes there in multifamily homes. So I think what I'm hearing right now is that we're fine, or the PRD is moving forward. We're not as concerned about R2, R3, but R1 and GA are still have their own specific concerns, and maybe some groundwater things like that. We could address those in another discussion if you'd like.
I think that's a pretty good summary where we're at. Anybody else have any? Thank you. Um, and I know that's more work, and that's where we're at, I guess. So if we could do that, you guys, that would be that'd be helpful. And then we'll bring it back and have at it again. Is that all right with everybody on the committee? Any last comments anyone has? Gary?
Not on that, but a person asked me when are we going to have a public hearing on our comprehensive plan? How far away is that for the county? Is that in a distant future, or we're talking months?
We haven't written a new comprehensive plan, so it'll,
Okay.
I mean, I think our goal right now is 18 months or less.
Oh, from now then,
Yeah.
okay, year and a half.
Right.
But we'll have meetings and things
Right.
to address it, but the actual public hearing for approval, I think, would be.
Because a person asked me that and I had no
Yeah.
idea. I said,
Yeah, I think we're talking about spending a fair amount of time
Yeah.
on public participation and input and then the final writing. So the hearing would be at the end of that process.
Yeah.
But lots of opportunity for engagement
mhm.
in the meantime.
And when we bring, the discussion of comprehensive plans back again to the committee, we'll make sure that we address that timeline, so you have that clear.
So if we could, if the staff could take this discussion and try and make sense out of it in terms of suggestions for options, that would be really helpful. And we'll bring it back to our next meeting. Is that possible? Ann? So we can keep moving forward? Okay. All right. With that, then we'll move on to our next item, which is, what is it? Where am I?
None.
Discussion of the permitting of accessory structures. We're going to have you just provide us with some thoughts about that, I think, right?
I guess I would like to know I think this was Supervisor Kinnear wanted this item on
Yes,
there.
he did.
I-
Yes, if we could have this on there.
I don't
And
really know
and I
what
think it was a
actually he
general-
wants to talk about, but
Mike's
I'm here.
request was that we have a general discussion about it. And my suggestion was that we give you time to think about it before we have that discussion. But maybe we'll start by having Mike explain his concerns.
Thank you for reminding me about what it was. Randy Proctor in particular has brought up multiple times that if a person has two lots adjacent, that you can have your house on one lot, but you're not allowed to build an accessory structure like an outbuilding or something on the separate lot. And he says, that's crazy. Is it? I don't know why that rule is there, and I don't know if it should be or shouldn't be. But I told him I'd bring that up, and it does seem a little unusual. But then, I don't know. Do you know what I'm talking about as far as what he's asking?
Yeah, so
Okay.
I guess I can't speak to why it's there because I wasn't here when this zoning ordinance was written. But I think that one of the reasons is that typically when you have a lot, it's in a subdivision or, it's smaller, it's been created by a CSM. When you have a separate lot, you can have a separate sale. So you could sell the garage separate from the home. You could get a situation where someone, and I'm not saying whether this is right or wrong, I'm just saying the possibilities. If you had your home on one lot and your garage on the other lot, you could sell the lot. Someone else could purchase the lot and just have their garage there, and they're not actually living there. That would affect your tax bottom line. I mean, if you're designing in a neighborhood and you're zoning it as R1, as a town, I'd imagine that you're anticipating some tax revenue coming in from those potential houses. If you just have a garage on that lot, that would be different. Typically, if they're right next to each other, you do have the ability to combine those lots, and then you would be able to have your garage. But I have seen situations where, say, the lot is across the street, and they want to build the garage across the street, and they're like, well, I own both. Why can't I just put my garage here? So I know we've had this question come up before, and it, we would like the ordinance to be a little more clear on how we should be permitting these things. But the way we're interpreting it right now, we can't have a garage on a separate lot from the house. If it's a parcel, it's a different situation. I could make this more complicated, but I don't know
No,
how
that's
far you want to go.
That's good. Just, is this something that might be addressed? Because you had talked about eventually after the comprehensive plan, rewriting the zoning ordinance, something that could be addressed then, or not, but brought up.
I mean, it could certainly be just another, text amendment that we address. If we have ideas on how we'd like to change it or how the PRND would envision a change happening to address it.
And I think that's all you wanted, Mike, was just a brief and general discussion, so. And this has come up several times over the years, and we have not had a real clear answer as to why we do that. Let's see, I think that does our agenda for the most part. Then we're down to announcements. Are there any announcements? Chase already announced a couple of things. Anybody else? Our next meeting date is February 7th.
I have
And yeah, Chase.
suggested a future agenda item. So at our next
Sure.
meeting, we intend to bring a full comprehensive report of the groundwater monitoring program
Oh,
from
okay.
last year, with the intention of taking that to full county board in February as well. We do have, last night we attended the joint town-city meeting. That's a quarterly meeting per invite we gave a high-level review of the groundwater program and the results. This would be a more in-depth, and the one presented to county board be more in-depth as well. But we also have a roadshow schedule set up for a number of other requests that will give varying degrees of the report. So I guess as far as future agenda items, we'd like to bring that back here on first meeting in February. So.
How was the attendance last night? Did you get a good crowd?
It's my first meetings, but I think
Okay.
it's the typical crowd. So.
Okay, yeah.
Just a comment, I think it was well received. And yeah, it was the typical crowd, the Tainer and Town of Menominee and Town of Red Cedar and the city were all represented, and the county. Chris Corporal was there, along with you and other people. So yeah, it was
Okay.
well done.
Anything else? Yep. Yeah. I should have had you, well, without objection, could I ask if we could reopen public comments and allow just a short comment from folks? Okay. Yes. Would you like to?
I have some, okay, yeah, mine's a couple minutes, just some thoughts.
Yeah,
on
you're very
it.
short.
And I know there's two other
A
people.
couple
that
minutes,
weighed in
please.
during
Yeah.
that discussion. So again, do you need me to repeat my address again? No, okay. So in listening to you guys talk, it was very interesting. This is the first time I've been able to sit through a whole meeting, and watching the minds tick is kind of interesting. Some of the thoughts I had is, yes, I do think that the ADU should be under special exception with conditions. And I say that because I've watched through the township, and I also agree with a renewal on that, or maybe a check-in. There's some properties in the town of Menominee that were under special exception, were transferred ownerships. One in particular right now is a hot mess, and all the neighbors, there's nothing we can do about it. It hasn't been reviewed. There's concerns about ground pollution, oil draining in, abandoned cars. that kind of thing. So I don't think that a review is a bad thing at all. Um, and I can say, as far as there was some comments about it being restrictive or being a hard process to go through a special exception. I can tell you it'd be a lot easier if had I been able to do that than having to get a new survey, a rezone, and do all these things to get my mother there. I think that the process of getting a special exception is fairly easy and spelled out accurately and clearly on the county websites and on the township websites. Um, and the square footage, I definitely think that 1,500 square foot is a full home. That's about what I'm going to be building now for my mom. I can tell you that my mom, my brother, and I lived in the St. Paul in a 390 square foot apartment for 5 years as middle school and high schoolers, and we managed. So, you know, I wanted to just comment on that, that small spaces can be lived in quite well. One thing that I had in researching a lot of this for the place that I'm doing, almost every municipality and county has some verbiage in their ADU stuff that the buildings must match. That speaks to property values, or at least in some way looks similar. That keeps property values up, especially when you're talking about this discussion with R1. I think she shed in R1, and having it match protects those property values. Do she sheds have bathrooms and sinks? I don't know. So that came up with the R1, you know, is that something that you're thinking? So those were my comments and my thoughts on the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Eldora D. Rod from just north of Wheeler. I do like the gentleman said that he wants some guidelines on requirements that were fairly strict. I don't have a problem with that. But I'd like the guidelines to be something that's simple to work with, that I, as a layperson, could go in, pick up the instructions, say, oh, I have to speak to this person, or I have to speak to this person, and then I can build whatever I need. I can see this getting very complicated very fast, and I think you need to avoid that. It just makes it even worse. I had to pay $25 to buy a permit to build my house, and that has irritated me no end, that I could buy a permit for a driveway, for a septic system, for electric system, for all of this, but I had to pay $25 to the state in order to buy all of these things. So I can see where things could get extremely complicated, and I would prefer that you kind of keep it simple for us, simple people. We are building, hopefully, a 750 square foot house, and it's a handicap house. It will not have a kitchen in it. So I'm hoping you don't put too many guidelines in it, because there are exceptions to the general rule of a house that has some requirements, but this requirement is no kitchen. So, and it'll be 50 feet from the house. And the other question is we are a 3-bedroom house now. We have a 3-bedroom septic system. We want to take the 1 bedroom from the house, so to speak, put it out in this little addition that's by itself, and use the same septic system. I don't see a problem with it. However, I'm not sure how the government looks at that, and that's my question. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Others?
Scroll through this real quick, because most of it doesn't have anything to do with this here. Let's see.
Name and
Alright.
address, please.
I'm Diego Marin, I'm 630 Broadway, and I'd like to first talk about maybe setting up a bracketing system. So based on your parcel size, you have increasing, decreasing brackets of allowable maximum footprints. I like footprints because I think there's a lot of creativity in expanding vertically. Scrolling down. I also think that it is worth considering that for someone buying a new property, it would be a feasible strategy to first build what will be considered the ADU unit, and then build the primary structure later in order to give people agency and be able to retain their equity for the period of time that it takes to build their primary house. The next point I'd like to make is that I know people with really big families. My family, my dad was one of 8 siblings, and it'd be really nice to have more than 600 square feet. I think that we should be sending out scouting teams to essentially map where we're going to understand an increase in population density, and in addition to that, be able to begin to lay out long-term plans for permanent sewer structures and infrastructure that will accommodate that. It is a contest of urbanization for an increase of quality of life for the people generally living in a populated area, in contest with, smaller privileges that people will have to, remediate by participating in their community and forming a culture, with your neighbors, so that you can kind of appreciate that there's a little family of kids running around now suddenly in this aging, old mansion town. Things like that I think are the kind of developments that I think will promote a healthy environment as we grow as a city here. And definitely want to contest any minimum parcel sizes in regards to ADUs. I think accessibility is very needed, and I would even contest setting up a minimum distance from other buildings in regards to there being elderly people who will need physical proximity to the other resources that the main primary dwelling units will provide at times. And I think that wraps up my notes.
Thank you. Very helpful. Yeah. You can, yeah.
Jesus, Tom.
Do I restate my name? Benjamin Mammon.
No, we got you.
Okay. Okay. Just a quick comment on, I have a kind of a dual agricultural residential listing of my farm, so I don't know how that fits into the whole dynamic of RW1. Is that how you say it?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, agricultural residential, that's what my plot is, and I don't know where that fits. And also, what kind of the previous guy said, Diego. My brother-in-law, sister-in-law, they have 2 kids. I don't know if like 600 kind of matches. So I would contest also for 1,500 is a good number, but no basement. I mean, primary, like what Diana's been saying a lot is, needs to be subservient to the previous main dwelling.
So you're you're in a general ag zoning area? Okay.
Agriculture residential.
Oh, agri.
So it's a kind of a dual property. So I think that, I don't know if that's gray area and needs to be kind of subserved to one or the other to be in it, or if it just, it's a gray area.
And you're speaking to having a larger footprint, the 1,500 square feet, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Welcome to talk. Okay. So that's helpful. Thank you. Okay. Then I guess we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Oh, yeah.